It's not just TV, it's expanding our minds. PBS Hawaii, home is here.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaiʻi are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Carl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and the Pacific since 1857, making a positive difference in the communities where we live and work. Talks about building a new jail on Oʻahu have been happening for more than a decade, and there's still no clear path forward. This year's state budget includes $30 million just to complete the planning of a new facility that could now cost an estimated $1 billion to build. Some say the focus should instead be placed on reforming our prison system and rehabilitation. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. The Oʻahu Community Correctional Center, or OCCC, was originally built in 1916. The buildings you see today were remodeled in the 70s. It was designed for a capacity of 628 beds with the operational capacity of around 950. But in years past, the population has swelled to as high as 1,400 inmates. The Kalihi facility is crumbling both inside and out. Millions of dollars in state funding has already been spent to plan for a new jail in Halava. Another $30 million has been allocated in this year's state budget to continue the planning and design. Tonight's panel will give us a progress report. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii YouTube page. Now to our guests. John Schell is the warden at the Oʻahu Community Correctional Center. He's held that position since 2023 and has more than 2 decades in the corrections and criminal justice field. He started his career as a corrections officer at the Oregon Department of Corrections. Representative Della Albalati represents District 26, which covers Makiki and Punchbowl. She was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2006 and is currently the chair of the House Committee on Public Safety. Kiki Walker is a community organizer and grant writer and has been part of the Reimagining Public Safety in Hawaii Coalition for the last 2 years. She focuses on harm reduction, disability justice, and holistic wellness through community outreach. And Kristen Johnson is the oversight coordinator for the Hawaii Correctional Systems Oversight Commission. The 5-member independent commission was created by the state legislature in 2019 to help improve our corrections system. Thank you all for being here tonight. This is a very important topic and one that we all have a stake in. John, I want to start with you. Just some of the basics for folks who are not familiar with OCCC. Typically, who exactly is housed there?
Okay, well, I'll start out by I want to define what the difference is between a jail and a prison, because they're two very separate things. A jail houses people who are pretrial as a general rule. We also handle sentenced misdemeanors, and our population is very much in transition all the time. Average stay is probably somewhere between 6 weeks and 2 months. So we get people in, we get people out. We focus on mostly trying to triage what things they come in with problems and then trying to help them solve them if we can do it in the short term. We are not there to provide long-term care. What we hope to do there is to connect them with services either back in the community if they go back in, or to connect them if they continue on through the justice system so that they can get the treatments that they need later on. So what we try to focus on there is more like triage them, treat what we can immediately do, and then move them forward to get them services as they move on.
You know, we mentioned the capacity issue right off the top. I'm curious as to how many inmates are there right now.
Well, currently at the facility, we have 920 as of this morning. Of those, approximately 150, 175 are furlough inmates. So these are people who have already been sentenced, already gone to prison. They've been in prison and now they are at the end of their cycle. And what they're doing is we bring them to the furlough center so that we can get them back out into the community, connect them with jobs, help them get connected with services. they're only there, in a sense, part-time, because they're out released to go to work and do things in the community and come back at night. And that's where they stay until they finish their sentences.
Representative Albalati, how do you feel OCCC is working, given the capacity constraints that we talked about, and the services that the warden is laying out, trying to help these folks as they transition perhaps to another system? Do you think that OCCC is serving properly?
I think we have staff who are doing the best that they can with facilities that are extremely challenging and rundown, and that we need to be doing more to invest in both maintaining facilities, building new facilities, and then investing in the services that will help connect these individuals, inmates, to community.
So $25 million approximately of state money has already been spent on this sort of planning process. Another $30 million was put in the budget for more planning. How do you feel about the rate of progress on this project?
I actually kind of want to turn to John because he will know. And my caveat is I'm new to this chairmanship. And so I really took this session to listen, to understand the budget request coming from the department. And I think one of the things that's happening in the community is, people are framing it as either or. We either invest in new facilities or we put more money into reentry services. My position is we have to do both. It's a parallel funding process. And what gets lost in the conversation is, yes, we did put $15 million for continued design and for the OCCC for this fiscal year, and another $15 million. My hope is that DAGS and Gordon Wood are going to use that money very wisely. And in a lot of ways, CIP funds are different. We also put in $4 million in fiscal year 2026 and $4 million additionally in 2027 for reentry services. So sometimes what gets lost in the conversation, I think, is really unfortunate, is that they're not investing in reentry. We are. We're doing both, and that's what we need to do. We need to do both with the precious resources that we have.
John, before we get back to you, let's go to Kiki. What are your thoughts? Are we investing enough into those other services that the representative is talking about?
Just having worked in social services and care services for the past 10 years in Hawaii, I can't say that that's true. I think that there's a lack either in communication or just a lack of funding that's going to service providers. And I know, John, we had spoke about that a little bit before, that there's kind of a dip in where people are not accessing all of the reentry services that they could be accessing because there just isn't enough income for people who are working in the field. There isn't enough income going into these service providers in general. And I think that's where our stance is that, we do agree with maybe a dual funding process where there is more funds being put into community care and also improving the conditions that are existing right now for inmates.
Yeah, Kristen, let's get to you. Where are we in this planning process, given all the resources that have been invested already? We understand that this project could cost, $1 billion for a fully new facility. So when we look at the money, $25 million already invested, the $30 million on deck, sort of how are we moving along?
Yeah, I want to make sure that we really focus on John as far as the planning process goes. But the one piece that I will say is that, when we're having these conversations, one thing that's interesting to me is that we usually talk about community or jail. And to Rep's point, I also think it needs to be both. And one thing that I think we need to talk about more is actually bringing the community into the jail. We need to bring these providers into the facilities and welcome them with open arms, and so that it relieves the staff of having to do mental health work that they're not prepared or trained to do. And it really adds to that continuity of care so that when people are exiting, they already know the providers, they already know where to go, they already know who to talk to because they met them in the facility, they started working with them in the facility. And so I think there's multifaceted approaches to this, but that's one point that I wanted to share.
John, we keep coming back to you, so let's come back to you. Where do you think we are in terms of, actually being able to realize having a new facility?
Okay. Well, I think that we're actually making progress on this. We have done site selection. Site selection has been done. They've done the environmental impact statements. We've moved forward that. What you have to understand about any new facility, you have any major project like this, a lot of what happens before you ever move a shovel full of dirt. It just, you have permitting, you have requests for qualifications for your people who are going to build it, you have requests for proposals from people who are going to build it. We have to have our legal people look at it, make sure it's going to meet our needs and that we're actually going to get the product that we need. It's very important to me that if we're going to spend this kind of money, that we actually get the product that we are paying for. We are going to get what works. We don't want to just throw money away. We want this to be money that's well spent.
Yeah, and in the meantime, what are those conditions like? I mean, we made reference at the top of just about the age of the facility itself, renovated in the 1970s, but that's quite a long time ago.
I can tell you that right now it would take millions of dollars to get the facility back up to where it is in good shape. It's old. We have problems with roofings, we have problems with cells, we have problems with fencing, virtually anything that you can think of. We have rats, we have all kinds of problems in this place that needs to be addressed. That's money that needs to be spent if we're going to stay in that place, even if we got it up to its shiny, tip-top condition, it's still not going to meet our needs. The design of this facility does not meet the needs of a modern correctional facility. The floor layouts in it have blind spots, which put people at risk when they come in because of the officers. Doesn't matter that you have two of them standing there watching the floor, they can't see everywhere all at once. It's impossible the way the place is designed. In addition, it's inefficient. We have to have more staff just to open the place up than we can keep hired right now. Right now at OCCC, the last number that I got, which was at the first of the month, we were 100 positions short for officers out of 413 positions, I believe is my number, which means that roughly a quarter of my staff are not there. When you have that type of problem filling positions, and it's been that way for 2 years since I've been there. So it's not getting better appreciatively. Now they're out recruiting all the time, we're just not getting people. If we were to design a new facility that could be run more efficiently, with better view so that we can do more with less staff, nobody loses a job, but we could actually do the job that we need to do. Right now, that's hard to get accomplished when you're that short.
Kiki, you look like you're thinking, I want to know.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering, and just based on what you said, wanting to do more with less staff, does it make sense that we're building an even bigger facility if we're not meeting the needs of one that's, you know?
That's a great question, Kiki, and that is a concern until you start to think that by designing a facility and having technology in the facility, like a working camera system, like having places where you can actually watch the entire floors, you can actually supervise more people and keep it safer with fewer staff than what we have budgeted right now. As I said, it's going to take 320 guards to run the place.
And I'm just also thinking of what Tommy Johnson, their current director, said that 87% of the people that are currently in OCCC could be released because they're there for nonviolent offenses and could be on supervised release, which this turns into a more systems issue. I know you were saying this is something you can't control, but that addresses overcrowding and still kind of goes back to the point of, do we need a much bigger jail or do we just need a better facility?
Yeah. Representative Al-Baladi, tell us what your thoughts are on that. I mean, that's almost another program in and of itself, this whole idea of how we punish people and whether it's appropriate that they're at OCCC to begin with. But I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So a couple of things. There has been a lot of work done in trying to do pretrial diversion. Today we celebrated bill signings for community court, for the women's community court. So we are working in those areas to do more reentry community-based services, but we still need a facility. And so again, I'm going to keep coming back to this. It's not either or, it's both. And I think with respect to not having control, that's a really big deal. I actually think that this is not, to build out community-based services, this is not just an issue for Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. We need to ask ourselves, what is the Department of Health standing up in their service programs, in their mental health service programs, in their substance abuse service programs in the community? Because the people flowing into that, those are the pretrial detainees. John, correct me if I'm wrong. And those are exactly the people you don't have control over. So if the courts do not have the programs that are staffed by DOH or contracted by DOH with the community, that's not DCR's problem. This is a problem where I really believe the governor, who, he is committed to really like mental health services. He's talked about that. That's the whole point of his Kauhale initiative. I would like to see more collaboration between DCR, DOH, real collaboration. And the problem is we haven't even started talking about the problem of the state hospital. There is a cycle of people moving from jails, prisons, to state hospital, to community, because we don't have the kinds of programs we need by AMHD, the Adult Mental Health Division.
And even outside of that too, there just isn't enough resources available for people in community. So we're going to continue to see this cycle around. It might be that they end up building a super jail, which is not ideal, right? But in 10 years, we're going to see the same issues, because what we need to address is the community care that's happening. Like you said, more money needs to be put into the Department of Health system. There needs to be more resources allocated for our community members so we can continue to grow families and community.
Can I challenge you a little bit on this? And
Sure.
I feel like, because I was chair of the health committee before this, and we've actually systematically been investing more and more in community-based services. So my question is, why aren't we seeing those programs out there? Some of it has to do with the understaffing across the community. We don't have enough nurses, doctors, social workers throughout the system, right? But there's something else going on, and I don't know what it is. I think there's a lack of collaboration that we need to really keep pushing on.
Yeah, and I think it's also, a lot of the service providers in community are nonprofits. So sometimes they're not dependent on the same types of funds. And when I also think of like the folks that are getting engaged in social work, or maybe they want to be a mental health professional, when they look forward in their career path, I mean, right now, if you get hired as a case manager at some of these agencies, people are getting paid $14 to $16 an hour. That isn't really something, if you're in your master's program and you're spending all this money for school, you want to look forward to that income. You can't really think of, how's this going to support my family? How's this going to support me? And so people move off island also. So I think that's where a gap is as well, is that we need to have a living wage available for mental health professionals to entice them to be in the field.
These are deep systemic issues.
Yes.
But I want to get back and get Kristen's perspective to some of the viewer comments and just sort of your perspective on what you've heard so far. But there is a question here: why not build on OCCC property? I know that there's another site that's chosen in Halava, but it says it's centrally located and no impact statement needed. Why is the current site not appropriate?
I don't know if there's any issue with the current site that's been chosen in Halava. It's state property. I know that they've gone through the process for years at this point, right, of getting all of the different approvals and different things. So I don't think it's
I mean the existing site, the OCCC site. Like, why not just, this is saying, why not expand the existing?
Well, my question would be on that, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to steal your question, but if I'm going to build a new facility on that site, what am I going to do with the people while the facility is being built?
Fair point.
You can't tear down what currently exists, and it's stuck right in the middle of Kalihi, which is really densely built up anyway. And it takes 2.5 years to build a facility. We have to have some place to house those people during the time.
And if I could go back to something that John said earlier, so you had mentioned that it's important to have a facility with the cameras and everything so you can potentially have less staff. Mm-hmm. One thing I want to make very clear is that the commission's position is that we're not against a new jail. In January, we did ask for a pause until we can see some type of a better systemic plan to better, implement all these different services that we keep hearing about, right? Like, we don't know if a new building by itself is going to suddenly fix the system. That's what we're concerned about. But one thing you mentioned about staffing, though, that, the commission takes issue with is that you can't replace face-to-face interaction with a camera. And so when we're talking about the different types of supervision, I want to make it clear to the audience, there's direct supervision where you have officers on the floor 24/7. They're in that unit 24/7 with the with the people in custody. And then you have indirect supervision where, you know, intermittently somebody might stop in, stop out. That's more like what Halava has. Or you have completely indirect where somebody may be in a bubble watching over a unit. We see more suicides with that type of system. When you have direct supervision, the staff know immediately if somebody missed their meal. They know immediately if somebody's acting off, if they might need medical, if they might need mental health. So the one thing I just want to make it clear from the commission standpoint is, you know, we're in favor of a smaller facility, really looking into more of these diversion programs we've been talking a little bit about, right? But definitely not taking away any staff positions at all, because we need them. Their work is imperative. I think that the few give the many a bad rap, and that's unfortunate. But those corrections officers, I mean,
they work hard.
They work hard, and we need them. We need them to prevent suicides. We need them to be in those spaces. So I just wanted to make the point that direct supervision is very important.
And I agree with you totally on that, which is why when we design a new facility, even though I want it to be direct supervision, there will be people on the floor. One of the things that I would like to have is no more keys on the floor where the inmates are, no more door controls on the floor where the inmates are. We need to have that somewhere apart from it. And that actually is for the safety of both staff and inmates. Right. This is what I'm saying when I say that this is an antiquated system. It's antiquated to the point where it's conceivable that those doors could be opened at a time that they're not supposed to be opened. And there's not much we can do to control that right now. We need better systems, better technology than 1975 provided us.
Yeah, that
and that is part of what this is. And the current design that we have is designed around that system, so there's no real way to change that, which is part of why we need a new and a better layout for the facility, because it's just not designed for what we currently face.
Della, I'm curious, Governor Green has floated this idea of bringing the Federal Detention Center into play. What are lawmakers feeling? What is the Public Safety Committee's sort of view on that? Is that a real possibility? You know, his argument is that there is this very high security facility that has a lot of room in it at the moment.
So I think it's always been kind of like a thought out there that we could quickly do that, but there's a lot of problems with taking over and buying a federal facility. I think it would take an act of the president and an act of Congress in order to actually purchase that. So I think it's something that we have played with, but I don't think it's a reality. And I will add one more thing, because this is a development that's happening because of the needs of this federal administration to do more immigration detention. We know that the FDC Honolulu has been put out as a potential place for a contract for more immigration activity by the federal government. That's a story that's been developed by the Miami Herald. I had a reporter call about that recently. So I highly doubt that the FDC Honolulu is a reality. And I think we need to focus on what's before us, what we've already invested monies in, and the kinds of planning that we've already done. If I can ask John a question, because I'm kind of curious about this. As we were going through the process of deciding to fund the 15 million and 15 million, my sense is that while we have the site selected, there's still questions about what the final design is going to look like. So there is still opportunity for the community to weigh in. And I guess what I take offense with sometimes is people are saying it's going to be this super facility or this super jail. The reality is that it's still in the planning phase. So if we know that there can be, what I hope is that we actually do reduce population more over time before the facility is actually done, which is in 2031, correct? I want us to do reductions in the numbers of folks in there, and then talk about building out parts of the facility where there is more transition centers, right? Where it's more modeled after places like we have in Arizona or Miami, which is where the governor's team has been looking at. I mean, am I wrong to say that, John?
Well, I would say you're actually on the right track, and I got some figures today so I could talk about that today. Right now, in our facility where we're at, we have 91 sentenced felon probationers that are at our place. And what that means is that these are people who are back on probation violations, but not necessarily on new charges. These are probation violators. These are the types of people that we would look at housing in a transition center, which is apart from the jail proper. It's a separate building. The idea is you keep your two populations apart. That way we can focus on their needs right there to get them back in, get them, you know, the help that they need, get them back in on track and back out into the community as quickly as we can. That's the idea behind the transition center. I have 91 that are sentenced felon probationers, and I have only 7 that are on. So 100 beds would hold that.
And that would be 100
currently,
beds in the new facility.
that would be in the new facility. Right now, those are intermixed in my population in a lot of cases because there's just no room at the end. There's not room there to have all of the different things. We already currently have special housing for mental health. We have a special housing for medical cases. We have another special housing for step-down mental health. We have a housing unit for maximum custody. We are hoping to have a step-down unit for those max custody to come back to GP and be reintegrated back into the population. We are already getting to the point where we don't have room to put probationers in one spot, and they really should be housed in their own environment that's set up with them to have services, have reach in.
Yeah, what you're talking about is permanent supportive housing,
Yes.
which the state really has to deeply, deeply invest in, and there has to be systems of care that are set up to be able to provide for people outside of the system completely. And I think also where our stance is, are there enough services to divert people from going to the jail system at all? Once you're in the system, the rate of recidivism is really high. And most of the people that are locked up, which is also like a social and racial justice issue, 30% of them are Native Hawaiians. So when we're talking about having a bigger jail and adding more and more services, I mean, there needs to be services that are applicable for people who are there, like you said, for up to 2 months they should be, right?
Yeah. Now, to be fair and frank on it, though, we do have some people who are there, and because their trials last forever,
They've been there much longer.
they've been there much longer. And those folks, but that is the exception, not the rule. The rule is probably that 2 months is what we have for average turnover.
You know, we've heard this idea of this super jail or different iterations of what this is going to look like. What's the Commission's view on what this facility, like what shape this facility should take?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. Interestingly enough, one of the previous directors, Max Otani, he actually made a commitment to work with a group, UHCDC, to create a huge report. It's called the Breaking Cycles Report. They did, I really can't talk about it. They did an incredible amount of work where they met with hundreds of people. They met with community members, they met with staff, they met with us, I mean, just across the board. And they actually went into the facilities and sat down with people in custody to figure out, what is it that you need? You know, they sat down with staff, what is it that you need? What can this look like? They sat down with, you know, Native Hawaiian groups, what do you need? You know, and they created this massive report that really breaks down, you know, what the, I don't know if I should say perfect, but what an ideal jail for Hawaii could be. And so the blueprint is there, right? Like the work has been done. We have it. We have that. The Commission's concern is that we don't know if there's a firm commitment from the department to follow that blueprint. And that's our biggest concern. Because again, everything that's being talked about with this new jail, as far as it being, you know, the best for mental health and the best for this and the best for that, it's difficult for us to believe that when in the current facilities, we're not seeing people get out of their cells. We're seeing people in general population being locked down 22 hours a day. This isn't solitary confinement. This is general population, 22 hours a day. We're not seeing people get outside for recreation. We're not seeing people being seen by mental health when they need it. We're seeing people in mental health being put in solitary confinement. So our concern is that a building is not going to fix all of these social issues that are happening within the facilities right now. And until we see some type of true, committed, laid out systemic plan that shows exactly how we're going to get there in our current facilities now, and exactly how the new building will, again, you know, even make things better with the new facilities, new cameras, everything else, you know, that's why the Commission asked for the pause.
Yeah, I would love for you to respond to that.
Well, I tend to agree with you. They're not getting out of cell as much as they should. We've talked about this off camera many times. And I agree with you entirely. However, the one thing that you have to recognize is that a lot of it is driven by the fact that we have vacancies. Almost every time that we have to cancel recreation yard is because I don't have enough staff that came to work that day in order to get the job done. That's the reality of what I face. The only fix to that is to either hire more staff or have a better systemic layout so that we can actually do the job with fewer bodies that show up. If we can't hire the bodies to do the work, then we need to have a facility that allows us to do the work with less bodies.
We don't disagree with that, and that's why we surveyed almost 1,000 correction staff. Almost 1,000 staff took our over 120-something question survey, because we wanted to know exactly why they aren't showing up for work. We wanted to know exactly what the issues were. We wanted to know exactly where their mental health is, because this new jail isn't just about people in custody, right? It's also about staff. And we came out with many recommendations that didn't come from us, it came from the staff. And again, what we're seeing is, you know, aside from maybe a couple, we need to see more of a commitment to actually moving through and taking advantage of what those staff are asking for. And so, you know, I guess that's my point, right? Like, I struggle because all these conversations are important, but if I don't see, and if the commission doesn't see the movement forward and the commitment from the department, it's difficult for us to stand back and say, yes, we support this massive investment for a new facility.
Can I interject, Kristen, here? So today you had a commission meeting, and at your commission meeting, the deputy director said to the issue of understaffing and the problems with staffing is that UPW and the director are going to be sitting down at a meeting on July 7th to see if they can work out some kind of MOU around the staffing issues. So to me, I think that's a key milestone that we should be watching. And coming out of that meeting, are there commitments from both management and from the unions to address this understaffing problem? And that will then, to me, if I see progress on that effort, then, you know, then we can start talking about how are we going to spend the additional $4 million we just provided you for reentry services, right? So we have to take these things and address each issue piece by piece and not say, just pause the planning on the facilities. We keep doing that. Everyone has to be working parallel on all of these issues all the time. And I will also say one last thing. That report that the UHCDC created, that report can be taken into the design process that is now going to be built out in the next 2 years or so, right? It's not work that's going to go unnoticed. Certainly, we're not going to let them ignore it. I mean, I think there was really good community work, and so that input is something that can be now used in the design process. So, you know, I think we have to keep pressuring them to keep moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Really vital,
and
though,
I'm
too.
fine with the pressure, because here's my thoughts on this, and I've made it clear when we've talked earlier. I am not waiting until I have a new jail to work in to implement some of these changes. Some of these changes I'm starting to implement now. We're making progress. It's slow progress, but when you're turning a ship the size of OCCC, that takes time. But I don't give up easily. I want to see the change. However, that all being said, a new facility is going to make the change a little easier for it to get done. So again, it's not an either or. I want to make the change now, but I want to have a facility that is at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel, so that the changes that we make stick, and that we don't fall into bad habits and bad things because of the architecture problems that we face currently, the staffing shortages that we face currently. Those are the things that we need to make sure as we go forward with this that we address, because I will tell you right now, staff morale is a problem. Staff morale is a problem, and part of that is because people call in sick all the time. The director will tell you they call in sick, and they do. They call in sick because they can't get days off, and they're working 16-hour shifts, oftentimes. I mean, sometimes 3, 4, 5 days a week, 16-hour mandatory shifts, because we don't have enough staff to cover just to get the basic security needs met. Okay, when you have that, people burn out, people have a bad attitude, they have a graduation they're going to go to, they call in sick. It's not ethical, it's not right, but they do it. Why? Because they're taking care of their families. We talk a lot in our department about work-life balance, and we need to put our money where our mouth is a little bit on that.
Kiki, I want to bring you into the conversation. I know that your organization is calling for a pause, but for a sort of a different reason. What is your stance on how this process should move forward?
Personally, I think where we're at with I guess I can speak for myself too. I'd like to see more community involvement and access to information. So if there are changes being made, and like you said, seeing strong commitments where things are actually going to move forward, because the data that we have and kind of the patterns that we're seeing is that none of the plans have worked. Reentry isn't working right now for community members. And what does it look like in this new systems planning for community stakeholders to be a part of that? And this is community boards. These are people that just are average everyday workers or students, or where their voice is in the systemic planning of a new facility that's going to hold their family members. And they're, these are people's.
And that's a very important piece of what we do. And I have to say, I'm going to do a shout out for UHCDC, which is, they did remarkable work, and you already talked about it, but they did a great job of reaching out to people. They held, I don't remember, it was well over 100 meetings. They had all kinds of different things. I went to several of them, very informative stuff. It's hard to reach everybody, but we need to do a better job. And you and I just talking today, first time we've ever sat down and really, I think first time I've met you. But I can tell you right now, I want to share some information with you afterwards. I want you to come to my office so that I can show you some of the things that not only I'm planning to do, but things that we've already done in the last 2 years to make a change.
And most of the times too, I think, having that general conversation commitment is nice, but I think where we're at also with the coalition is being able to see hard set in paper that there's a pause and that things are planned out in a way that offers real true commitment. Because you can tell me right now, yes, we can let PAMI, so it's one of the councils that I'm on with Hawaii Disability Rights Center, that investigates mental health disparities across the board for people who are receiving services. We haven't been able to go into the jail to do surveys with people because you still have someone else to answer to.
All I can tell you on this right now, Kiki, is I will be looking into this. I don't have any information on why that is, and so I don't feel comfortable talking about it, and saying this is, I'm not going to sit here and make something up. But this is one of those things where when you have a concern, I have an open door policy, and I truly mean that. You can call me with your concerns. If I have the time to answer you, I will answer your questions, as long as it's not something that I'm giving you that's going to put you beyond, sensitive information.
Let me ask you this, and then I want to go to the representative, but you've mentioned staffing several times, and we know that this is a critical, this is kind of the linchpin to so many of the issues that you're facing. It's not just you, it's also the Honolulu Police Department, it's agencies across the board in the public and private sector. But why do you think it's so hard for your agency in particular to recruit and retain staff?
Well, we're not exactly what you would call a glorious career. There's not a lot of people who look at our job as being, so there's some people that look at it and say, you're not even cops, which is not exactly true. We're not cops. We do a different job completely. But a lot of people equate us to, we should be cops, and therefore we're not, therefore we're less than. And that's not true. I have some of the hardest working people on this island. They are some of the most awesome people. And they aren't, yes, they're rule enforcers, but they're more than that. They have to listen to the guy who's got a problem and help him get a solution for his problem. Maybe it's because he needs to connect with his family and they don't know how. They don't know what to do to get money on their books. They have to be a counselor in some cases. They have to be we mentioned mental health. They have to be able to read people for mental health and get them to the process. My guys aren't cops. They're much more. We have some awesome people that work in our facility. Unfortunately, I don't think the public really sees that. There's this vision that people who work in jails, correctional officers, guards as they're called a lot out there, that they are like you see on TV. and you never see a TV crime show where the prison officials are honest and true and hardworking. They're always on the take. They're always doing that, and that's the perception that a lot of the community has. I can tell you that that is not what we do for a living. We actually work, and my staff really believe that they can make a difference. It's what keeps them coming to work, even in these hard times when we don't have a lot of staff. What makes them come to work is because I have some very dedicated people who come in every day hoping that today's the day that they make a difference in somebody's life.
Representative Ablada, you mentioned a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. What are you hoping to see out of that when it comes to staffing? I mean, is it a question of, I know these are union jobs, so there's contracts involved, and it's not as easy as saying, okay, we're going to raise everybody or give a bonus, but is it a compensation issue? Is it a recruitment issue, a retention issue? Like, where do you see the problem when it comes to staffing?
This one is a hard one for me to answer, because I think it's about rules around when people come into work and when they can take leaves and the shifts. And so I don't know that it's necessarily about money. It's about how you organize the workday. And I do not pretend to know that I'm the expert on that. So I cannot tell you what's going to work. But I think something was mentioned in your commission meeting today about going to different 12-hour or 8-hour shifts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So what was interesting was when we surveyed correction staff, we completed the survey, and then we actually took the results and went back into each of the facilities and sat down and did talk stories with the staff to say, is this right? Does this feel like, where are we at with this, right? And if it is right, what do you need to change this? Because we were finding some really horrific findings. Most of the staff have PTSD, most of them have depression, anxiety, you name it, right? It's a stressful job. And so what's interesting is so with the union work, one thing that's surprising to me was that a lot of the staff wanted accountability. And so one thing that they're looking for is a better attendance program, so that, for the people who, and again, the few make the money look bad, right? But for the individuals who may be taking advantage of the system a bit much, there has to be some accountability there. And so I think that's one part of it. But I think a larger part of it too is incentives. Mm-hmm. The correction staff who have been there 10, 15, 20, 25 plus years, and there's a lot of them, we need to talk about longevity pay. Mm-hmm. They need to be rewarded for staying with the state and staying with the service. That's amazing. And so there's a lot of different pieces here. But one thing that the department is doing that I really appreciate is that they're looking into a staff wellness response team. That was a recommendation that came out of our report, because when we talk about suicides that happen in the facilities, one thing we never talk about is the amount of suicides that were prevented. And staff prevent those suicides. And so, but whether you prevent a suicide or catch one, unfortunately, it's traumatic for staff. And so one thing I appreciate about the department is that they're really putting in a strong effort to create that wellness team to make sure that, staff are just checked in on and made sure that they're okay. So I think that'll help as well.
There's some emails here, and thank you for those of you who are writing in. We're reading them as they come. Scott says, and Kiki, I'd love for you to respond to this. Why isn't the state instead investing $1 billion into expanding community-based mental health treatment and supportive housing and building a smaller and far less expensive jail? I know that we have talked about that it's not an either or, it's something that can be done in tandem, but do you think that the investment is in the right place?
No, I don't think the investment's in the right place. I mean, I think like we've stated already, there needs to be improvements to the current conditions for current folks that are in the jail system, but it doesn't need to be $1 billion. I mean, the DOE also just asked for $1 billion to rebuild schools in Maui and rebuild schools in Waianae, and they were told no. So just looking at where we're investing funds is really, really important. I think that question is great. Like, why aren't we talking about putting $1 billion into the school system? Why aren't we talking about putting $1 billion into SNAP and other benefits? I mean, they actually just took away millions of dollars for SNAP benefits for folks, which is going to also exacerbate community care and resource and accesses that people have. We need to come into these other social spaces with that same mindset. Can we invest $1 billion into our futures?
So if I can respond though to one thing though, yes, I do think it's important to invest in the community without question. But the one thing that I do want to point out, because I want to make sure that these folks haven't been forgotten about, because they have been for years. They've been forgotten about. That's how we got to the facilities. That's how we got to the point they are now, right?
And
We
it's a
have
yes
our,
and,
but we
right?
have our most vulnerable populations in these facilities.
Exactly.
The people who are homeless, the people with mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera. And
40% of them
we
are
can,
homeless,
We can go
right?
back and forth all day of who belongs in the jail and who doesn't, but at the end of the day, they're there.
Yeah.
And
And
so
they need
I do want to
services.
make sure that there is investment. I want to be careful, right? Because I think
Yeah.
sometimes when lawmakers hear, like, let's put it towards schools, let's put it towards this, it makes it really easy to not put anything towards corrections, and we can't do that either.
Yeah.
Actually, I just wanted to weigh in on that 40% number that you gave. And I've heard that number before, and I actually
surveyed in
let-
2020,
let-
right?
let me respond, please.
Sure.
Okay. Part of where that number came from is the fact that when we ask them, do you have a home? Do you have an address, a permanent address? And they don't want to give it to us, they don't put an address down. They are now counted as homeless. That does not mean that they're homeless. The numbers as we've done the thing actually sits a lot closer to 7% rather than 40%. So also you have to know that those numbers as the arrest figures that we're making contact with homeless people, not everybody who is arrested goes to jail. Some people are cited and released. A lot of homeless people are doing very minor crimes, trespassings, minor property damages. They never see the inside of a jail. They go down, they're booked, they're released.
Yes, and I mean, I do outreach in community almost every weekend for the past 2 years in Chinatown, and we're seeing about 100 folks every evening that we're doing outreach. And I've definitely had community members that are experiencing houselessness that go into the jail system, and then I see them, a couple of
They
weeks
do?
later.
Yeah.
So the number was still valid. I mean, it was 37.5% in 2020. Maybe it's changed. If it's changed all the way to 7%, I'd be really, really surprised.
The matrix is different because what you are measuring is who reports or doesn't report.
And maybe
And
that
that
also looks
does
like-
skew your numbers
Yeah.
significantly.
I think what we can all agree on is that the department needs to do a better job in
Yeah,
capturing
surveying.
that data.
So that looks
I
like,
agree with that.
you know,
I absolutely agree we
and there's,
can do better.
partners in care who can come in and do that type of surveying really in depth, and they have the system that's already been set up, and
You're absolutely right. And you know what would make that really easy is if I had space for them to actually come in and have an office to do it, which I do not have in the current facility.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like you're dealing with so much, and to have, 25% vacancy, and to be dealing with, you said over 900 people in a facility that's supposed to house, 650. You're dealing with, a 25% less staff and 30% more individuals. There are these comments that are coming in from people who've worked in the department, and I don't necessarily want to name names here, but they say, and this is just to give you an opportunity to respond to some of this. The department is toxic. We were promised temporary hazard pay, and the department is screwing us over. They don't keep their promises. Why should we be loyal? We are
Can I
overworked and
go with
burned
that one
out.
first?
Well, I'll just read a
Okay.
couple. Most of the, we've always been blamed for calling us sick. It's because most of the time they hold us back. They need to do more hiring. So, obviously you're dealing with a lot. And if you have people, like you said, working 16 hours, 5 days a week, I mean, that's not sustainable.
Right. I agree absolutely. And I can tell you that the folks who are talking about hazard pay, that actually has been a decided issue, and they are getting paid their hazard pay. It's coming very soon. I believe in July is what I heard, but it's already been approved. So that money is coming. So we're doing right by our folks on that one.
And
As
it's
far
not,
as-
can I just say something?
Yeah.
It's not an insignificant amount. It's
No, it is not.
$124 million.
It's 25% of any of the hours that they worked during
Yes.
COVID.
And they absolutely deserve that
They
money.
do. They do.
They
And
absolutely
I don't think you're going to find anybody that argues against that at this table. Everybody believes that they earned that. That was a time that they stepped up, and they need to be compensated for that.
But how do you turn that kind of a feeling around? Take the hazard pay out of that, because we know that they're not the only agency who has faced that debate. That's been something that's going on in all of the counties and different agencies. But, I mean, how do you turn that around given the challenges that you've outlined tonight?
Well, a lot of what you have to do is you have to get in there and you get to know your people. And you're not going to make that decision sitting in your office downtown or even at the facility and not getting to know your people. And I wish I could get to know my people even better than I do, but I think that I'm making inroads in that. And I believe that when you get to know the staff that work for you and they see that you're actually supportive of what they get and on their side to make sure that they have a safe, healthy working environment. That's what people want. They want money, obviously, but what they really truly desire is work-life balance and a safe, healthy environment and to do their job. I commit to doing that with them every day. Staff know that I have a reputation that if you need something, you truly need time off because your grandmother is deathly ill in
But I think
someplace.
one of the issues is that you're one warden and not all wardens do that. And
This
so
is
I think one of the issues when we're talking about like how do you get staff to realize that the department cares about them, right? Like the department has to care about them and the department has to make it clear from top down that we care about you and we're going to be flexible in any way that we can. And you can't always, of course, it's corrections, but just making sure that people are heard and valued and seen. And you're right, like getting to know them and meeting them where they're at in these facilities.
Well, and all I can tell you is I don't control the people who are above me, but the people who work for me, I can set the example. I can be the change I want to see in the world. And by doing that and encouraging the people who work for me to do the exact same thing, that's how I'll make the change. Now, it may only affect OCCC. Maybe I don't have an effect on Halava or women's, although I believe that the people who run Halava and women's will be doing their best too. I really do. I work with those guys closely and they're wonderful people. But I can make the change that I can make, which is to OCCC. And so that's all I can really talk to.
Representative Bellotti, we started out this conversation really talking about a new facility. I believe the trajectory is 2031 when we're supposed to actually see that. How realistic do you think that is?
We're going to hold DAGs to that. I mean, we have to.
Yes.
Because the current facility is horrendous. And so my hope is that we are moving forward. There's a lot of complications because I think the site that we're on, they have to move that.
Animal Quarantine Center has to.
So there's a lot of moving pieces, but I have confidence in Mr. Gordon Wood with DAGs that he's going to help move this project along. And so we should hold them accountable.
In 2031, Kiki, do you want to see a new facility? Given the state of the current one, we can't. It's obviously not working.
Personally, I'm in hopes that our community will address multiple issues, that we'll see less people in the jail system, that the folks that are in the jail system now are not being held longer than they need to be there, and that they're going through a diversion process. And I hope by 2031 that we have bail reform, so that way we're seeing less of a population in our jails in general. I don't think, again, our stance with the coalition and my personal stance isn't that people should be staying in a place of ruins and being mistreated and having their civil liberties mistreated either. I mean, people still need to be treated like humans and get the things that they need. But does it need to cost $1 billion? I don't think so. Am I the super expert on that? No, but I think, like, again, as a commission has asked for, putting a pause on that, bringing in experts, bringing in community leaders, making sure that we have cultural response in the systemic creation of something that's gonna, possibly be in our community for decades is really important.
Well, let me ask Kristen, you've asked for this pause. What happens now?
What happens now is we just continue to work with the department and see which direction they go. I mean, it's our hope that regardless of what happens, if the department moves forward, pauses, whatever it may be, that they continue to work with us as they have as partners, and that we can be involved, at least somewhat in the planning process so that we can understand better, and just make sure that, these mental health systems are being embedded in the infrastructure, that the programming systems are being embedded in the infrastructure, that they're not just side notes or things that sound nice, that they're really truly embedded in the system. So that's my hope.
Yeah, I'm just curious, when you think about $1 billion, right, why is this money well spent?
Well, what it does for us, one of the things that we haven't talked about here is that this is not just building the facility, but it's also the maintenance on the building for another 30 years, which means that we now have a building that we can count on. When something breaks, we can call up the contractor and say, it's broken, fix it. And I don't know, some of you have worked in state government long enough that getting money to fix things, deferred maintenance happens to everybody everywhere. This builds that actually into the process so that that money is paid for. And one of the things that's nice about what we're doing with the 3P process, we don't put the $1 billion up front. And I know that that's a little scary for some people because it's like now we owe money that we'll have to do. Think of it as a mortgage on your home. Nobody made you pay cash outright for your home. We all have a mortgage, right? Well, this is a mortgage. That's what this basically is. But even more than a mortgage, it's money that goes towards repair of this place. Currently, if we have something that breaks at a facility that we just build and put the money out and it breaks, we're on the hook to fix it. Doesn't matter that it's only a 2-year-old building. If it broke, we have to fix it.
Can I add? And you have to come to us to ask for more money. So the 15 million that we put down for this fiscal year for the OCCC, we actually put down $59.75 million for maintenance, security fencing, ADA improvements in all of the other facilities.
And they need
that's an that's
They
an
need
annual $59.75 million.
Well, we have less than a minute yet left. Representative, I'll give you the last word. I mean, do you think this is $1 billion is money well spent, given all the other things that the state needs right now and all the federal cuts that we're anticipating and the cuts to services and Medicaid and all the things that we've discussed on Insights many, many times?
We have to find the money to fund all of these things. The way we treat prisoners, inmates in our system says a lot about what we are as a society. The way we treat our students in our schools says a lot about what we are as a society. And I believe that Hawaii protects the most vulnerable, whether it's the most vulnerable adults who've been thrown away by society, or it's the youngest kids who are just dreaming and hoping for a better Hawaii. And we got to invest in both.
Okay, and we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Of course, we do thank our guests, OCCC Warden John Schell, and from the Reimagining Public Safety Coalition, Kiki Walker, State Representative Della Albalati, and Kristen Johnson from the Hawaii Correctional Systems Oversight Commission. We're off next week for Insights, but we'll be back on July 10th. Lawmakers passed legislation this year to implement new safety measures for moped and skateboard riders. One of the biggest requirements relates to helmets. We'll discuss the changes and potential impacts. Do join us then. I'm Yanji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Until next time, aloha.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaii are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo.